Hello, I'm Soycat, and the Labour government of Keir Starmer has just promised a migration drop into the UK and even unveiled plans for a tightened visa system, with the goal being that net migration should fall significantly over the next 4 years. This is a controversial move for someone leading a left-of-centre party, and so the big question is, why is the Prime Minister doing this? And what's funny is there's an official answer to that, the one the government has given, and then there's the answer that I think most pundits are giving in response, which is the unofficial response to the big party that is lurking over this. And let's talk about both of those answers right after we go into what has actually changed with the visa rules for the UK. So basically, the simplest way to describe this is rowing back on what changed in 2019. The previous government, under Boris Johnson, set up a system that allowed firms to directly hire health and social care workers from overseas, and instead now they'll be required to hire British nationals, or at least extend the visas of people working already in the country. But crucially, also there'll be an increase in the cost to sponsor workers to come into the UK, up to $2,400 for small firms and $6,600 for large firms. Universities will be hit by higher charges and will have strict thresholds, with 95% of international students coming in on work visas expected to start their course and 90% expected to finish. And then crucially, the skilled worker visa, which is one of the types that have been surging recently, is going to have its requirements go back up, which means that generally, instead of requiring an A-level, which is what Boris Johnson's government had required, instead you'll need a degree level qualification if you're coming here for skilled work. This is also being paired with a couple of more cultural changes. The big one is English language requirements for all work visas is increasing. This is controversial to some people, but I feel like if there's one country that you can argue English is like required in, you know, if you want to argue like, oh, it's British people's fault for not speaking other languages, then it's like, okay, yeah, British people don't speak other languages, and so it probably is a good idea to be able to speak the language that people speak here. And the other kind of interesting one here is the amount of time that immigrants need to remain in the UK before applying for settled status. It will double from 5 years to 10, while setting up a fast-track system for high-skilled, high-contributing people. But yeah, the indefinite leave to remain, the point at which you become eligible for benefits and can basically get yourself on that citizenship track, is actually going up from 5 years to 10. So why is this happening then? I think the simplest answer as to why is that the amount of migration coming into the UK, it hit a record in 2023 of 906,000, but it was still 728,000 in the year to June 2024, which, just to put in perspective, the normal in the UK through the 70s, 80s, 90s was about zero net migration. That is to say, a bunch of people left, hundreds of thousands of people left, and hundreds of thousands of people came in, but the numbers were balanced. And then in the early 90s and the 2000s, it was fairly normal to see about 250,000 people net arrivals in a year. This led to a bit of an anti-immigration surge, but it did stay, steady throughout that decade. And then what happened during the government, you can blame COVID or Boris Johnson, they eased a lot of, restrictions on how you can come into the country, basically in response to the number of EU people who weren't coming here. And so we massively upped our net migration to 728,000, which, even if you're super pro-immigrant, right? I think this is something why there's a lot of critique coming here. Even if you're super pro-immigrant, you have to say at some point, like, yeah, surely even if we only care about immigrants and the people who live here already mean nothing to you, then at some point you are lowering the standards for the people who have just migrated to the UK by allowing too many more to come. And more crucially, if you do say that the people already living here are important, which is, sometimes a minority political view, but if you say that is important, then what's crucial, and what the government says is their reason for this, is that one, there is obviously a plan to make sure that we need to stop government companies being addicted to importing cheap labor, and then instead they need to invest in the skills of people here. This is controversial because a lot of people don't like the idea of comparing people to goods, but everyone knew if the number of oranges went up in the world by 100 times, oranges would get cheaper, right? If there are way more oranges at the store to buy, if they're literally, they might start giving them away for free, or at least very, very cheaply. But if you apply that theory to labor, it's controversial. But yeah, I think that a lot of, whether it's true or not that labor is substitutable, low-skilled labor is something that businesses have been treating as substitutable, finding the very cheapest cost, and that is something which is a problem in that way. But also, crucially, the other reason that Keir Starmer says that he's doing this is because he wants to release pressure on public housing and services, and this is a really big one. If you add 700,000 people to the UK in a year, but don't build 700,000 homes, or even 350,000 homes, or even 70,000 homes, or even enough homes to keep up with all the migration from before, you are raising the cost of housing and guaranteeing that more people have to live in worse conditions, or indeed go homeless at the most extreme. And so if you are pro public services and you are pro housing, but you can't get stuff built, then that is one of the easiest ways to get it done. And so I think that this is the official reason, is that this is, he's kind of coming at it from the kind of more traditional left-wing heart angle of like, look, and traditionally anti-immigration has been a left-wing view that like, yeah, you should be looking after your workers in the same way that a union, if you will, looks after the people that work in the union. What is the biggest union, that exists within the UK? Well, maybe it's the Union of the Kingdom, you could say. So that's a really interesting point that, like, actually, and especially given that the government that has had all these things come in was actually the Boris Johnson Conservative government. Traditionally, Conservatives are like, oh yeah, more Labour, that makes things better for both businesses and people who rely on them. Whereas if you want things to be better for workers, you should have, at the very least, some way to not have 900,000 competitors to your workers come in. And so that is why this is going down on the official level. However, unofficially, and the thing that has to be mentioned and is mentioned literally everywhere in any article you can read about this, is that, yeah, there are going to be lots of changes. And the reason that this is happening is, well, to put things simple, opinion polls, so the Anti-Immigration Reform Party made widespread gains in local elections. And it's not just that they had these gains and then, like, for one election they went back. What's even crazier is if we look at the opinion polls right now, I mentioned just a few weeks ago, it was nuts that the Reform Party had become, basically the tied first party in British politics. The three major parties are now Labour, Reform and Conservatives by opinion polls, and that is crazy by itself. But now it has gone to the point where 29% of people say they will vote for the Reform Party, and just 22% for Labour, 18% for the Conservatives, 14% for the Lib Dems, and 10% for the Greens. We have the most five-party system we've ever seen in the UK. Realistically, four parties, sorry, Greens. But we have the most four-party system we've ever seen in the UK. And what's even crazier is that this is the average of the polls. I think that it's worth pointing out that if we go into, this is Mark Pack, I believe a Liberal Democrat, so this isn't like some, reform person who's massaging the polls. Some of the polls that they've been diving into have shown that the Reform lead is sitting at 33%, or a 13% lead over the Labour Party. We are about to get to the point, again, that I think there is a critical number. If you are about 10% higher than your next leader, you will just wipe the country in terms of electoral results. That's exactly what happened, actually, with the UK. The Labour Party got only 33% of the votes, but it was exactly 10% more than the Conservatives, and it meant that they just washed the country, because anywhere where there's any amount of competition, 10% is usually enough to swing it. It's only the die-hard Conservative seats, or the die-hard SNP seats, or whatever, the die-hard seats for whichever party that are going to stay in that way. The Liberal Democrats can concentrate their support in the south. The Reform Party is starting to concentrate in the Midlands and the north. But the important thing is that you can sweep the country with a very tiny majority and then get a very large majority. And that is what will happen in the UK unless there are changes. And I think any pragmatic government, even if secretly Keir Starmer goes home and thinks, oh, I just want to have 1 million extra people in the UK every year. I want it to be 2 million every year. I want it to be 5 million every year. Even if he secretly thinks that in his heart, which he doesn't, by the way, his official response has been that he thinks this is right. So let's get the exact quote from him, actually. Keir Starmer says he is doing this because it is right, because it is fair and what he believes in. Not because of reform, but regardless of whatever the case may be, I think this is actually UK electoral politics working out it's meant to. A lot of people would be like, oh, he's just doing this because of reform, and it's like, don't you think that you should, I know I got the hiccups in the middle of that sentence, don't you think that that's the right move to, if there's one party that people are overwhelmingly, that has one major policy, and everyone's saying, yeah, this is the policy I think is most important, wouldn't it be messed up to not do that? Again, if he's secretly dreaming in his heart of increasing migration 5 times, I don't know that that would actually be the right thing. But the critical thing that we have to mention here is that a lot of people will say, yeah, down to net zero. I think this is actually the official reform policy. But first of all, net zero migration isn't actually zero people coming in. The number of people who leave the UK still sits at about 250,000 a year. So just to stop the UK population bleeding, you do need about 250,000 migrants or so. Even the Reform Party will say that. But the more interesting problem is that we are in Europe quite unique because we have absurdly high immigration, which which does mean that whereas Europe as a whole is shrinking by population, where there's 750 million or 745 million people living in Europe right now, but by 2100, that number will have dropped by over 100 million. This is a concern, and Europe is really on one of the big ends of this. It's not just Europe, though. I think we should mention that China is going through an even worse version of this because they had such big peaks. They're going from 1.4 billion down to literally half that by the next century, and lots of countries are going through this problem, but the UK is notably, so I'll show you Europe again. This is the Europe population graph. It's doing pretty decent. This is with all of the immigration too, by the way, but you can see that like we are going to have fewer people in primary school by a lot than we did 10 years ago, and then it's going to keep on happening every 10 years. And then critically, as people are starting to retire, as this big bulge starts to retire, we're going to have more and more pensioners, and particularly living for longer and longer than we ever have before. We have a big issue in Europe, and the UK, I think if we leave aside which is a very, very big thing, if we leave aside the net economic effect, you can see that the UK is at least sustaining our population going forwards, which means it is easier to sustain the pensions, it's easier to sustain the ludicrous levels of government spending we become accustomed to. I want to point this out. This is a crazy fact, but the UK is going to spend 1.33 trillion pounds in the 2025-6 year. Here's what that looks like on a graph going up to 2021. We have massively increased government spending, and we've become addicted to the idea that it should always raise. So here's an interesting fact. So if we spend 1.335 billion, that's the amount, so 1.3 trillion in 2025, the amount we spent in 2020, or 2000, let's say, was 353. So if we put this into an inflation calculator, the amount we should be spending right now, if we spent the same amount plus inflation, we increased it every year by inflation, would be 660 billion pounds, but instead we spend literally double that. Government spending has doubled in the past 25 years, but we don't actually feel the benefits of it. People actively want it to go higher. Most parties are like, yeah, we should increase government spending on things. So we have a situation where we need more and more money just to keep things going right now, truthfully, because we spend so much on social protection, health. Again, I think you could argue these are issues that are worsened by migration or not, but these are the issues we really need to solve. And if we solve that, with the wave of immigration, or if we solve that with the tightening of immigration to ease the pressure, that's the really hard thing. Because the fun phrase that everyone's been repeating right now is that the UK is very socially conservative, fiscally liberal, or to put it this way, hang the pedos, fund the NHS. I've heard that so many times in the comments of this channel. And so what the interesting problem is, though, is like, hang the pedos is on the level of like, don't let anyone into the country who's not a proper born British person. But fund the NHS is a problem because one of the big problems with the large amount of immigration is we've become accustomed to, even with our massive health spending, a lot of that money is going to overseas nurses, overseas carers, and how do you solve that problem? Well, the answer is it's really hard, and I guess that's what the government's going to have to do over the next little while. But yeah, with that said, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I do want to quickly show you something fun that's been happening. So, despite not publishing videos the last week, my views have gone up, and also my earnings have gone up dramatically. I had my best earning day this last week, specifically without having uploaded anything. It's a funny thing that can happen with YouTube, but what the reason is because this video right here went a little bit viral. As you can see, it's doing pretty well. It's got about 100,000 views in the last 24 hours. That's more views, to be clear, than it got in the last 4 years. Wow, I uploaded this in 4 years ago. Anyway, what's interesting is this 4-year-old video is picked up, but then I went back and watched this video on the retention graph, and it's doing really well. And the reason it's doing well is something you can find out if we watch the video, because I just start in the middle of a sentence, because YouTube just cut out the intro of this video. And so, yeah, you know what's fun about this? Is my video with no intro has one of the highest retentions on the channel. I just start talking about the thing right in there. And yeah, I think I found the ultimate retention hack for YouTube. And so if you see me try it, now you know why. I'm just going to start mid-sentence, and the next video I do should be a lot of fun. Speaking of a lot of fun, I hope you all enjoyed this one. And yeah, I do think that if you want my opinion at the end of this, I think there is an interesting problem with migration in that it's an economic issue, a healthcare issue, and kind of social issue, or a kind of cultural issue, if you will. The fact that I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable when there are people who have just as much rights to be here as them who have no idea how to speak English. I'm amazed, by the way. Even in to make this not it's not offensive when we talk about Europeans. I know a couple of Italians who don't know English at all. They just speak to each other, and they're the only. I don't know how you possibly can live in this country for years like they have. But yeah, I know it's a surprising number of people who don't learn English, and also a surprising number of people in shocking situations who manage to pick up access to, I think the ability, the government social protections are something that have like a shame to them in the UK, which means that they're there as like the last resort. But if you don't have that like shame induced into you, you're like, oh yeah, the government just gives you money. The government just gives you a house in central London for literally a third of the market rate. If you want to read a funny story, I want to find this for you real quick. Sierra Leone First Lady, I guess it would be. There's a really funny story about she rents a council flat in South London. I don't know how that possibly ended up happening, but while 336,000 people are on the wait list for accommodation, the first lady of Sierra Leone, literally you would expect to be wildly wealthy, who owns an extensive property portfolio in Africa. It's like, yeah, well, obviously I got myself a 2-bedroom council flat. They're £800 a month compared to, like 2,800 if you're not going to have one. Why would I not get myself a council flat in London? And I think that there's a really interesting problem about mixing systems that work on this like kind of trust basis with then also systems that are like, yeah, you are here under very strict, very clear requirements. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. Maybe you think it's interesting. And I think that it's one of the weirdest parts that makes this debate unsolvable with a single policy. Because, you can lower migration, but then what about the NHS? You can culturally fix immigration, but then what about the economic issues? And I think that it is the reason that you can't just have a party be like, wait, all we have to do, because the Conservatives, if in the last few years of their power, they had actually kind of taken this anti-immigration thing fully, or, if the Labour government literally became the anti-immigration party, they could take the teeth out of reform, but there's a reason I don't think it's going to work, and I think there's a real dissatisfaction that just doesn't quite fit for either of the two major parties. How will that solve itself? Well, we'll find out over the next 4 years, won't we? But for now, second channel, don't care. Thank you to all of my Patreon supporters for giving me lobster roll money, and for all of my random getting my 4-year-old video recommended viewers for giving me also lobster roll money. It's even easy. Look at this. I got literally 100 people, 500 people have subscribed to me in the past week for a video that I uploaded a year ago. And then what's even crazier is it's led more people to start watching my my visiting the most dangerous country in the world video. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. Speaking of fun, hope you all enjoyed this one. Look at that. I got more subscribers on a year and 98 days into this video than I did in the first year and 98 days. It's nuts. Sorry, I assume you care about YouTube analytics, but if you don't, then thank you for watching anyway. And second channel, don't care. Goodbye.